What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Appreciate you guys tuning in for another video. If you guys are new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You know, we're really trying to grow the channel, pumping out a bunch of videos right now, and I don't want you guys to miss out on any future videos. So if you guys watched one of my previous videos about the best baits for November, you see I talked about the Alabama rig. And I told you I was going to bring you a deep dive video kind of diving into the intricacies of this bait. And that's exactly what we're talking about here today. So if you guys are ready, let's jump in and I'll show you all about what I like to do with my A-rigs. Okay, so the A-rig's been around for quite a while now. There's tons of different models. It kind of gets overwhelming, to be honest with you. And for me, I keep it pretty simple. We'll go through the whole setup here to start, but we're gonna start with the actual Alabama rig. You know, there's so many different models. If you go on Fish USA or any tackle shop right now and look at all the different Alabama rigs that are available, it's an overwhelming amount. I mean, you got 5 arms with 5 baits, you got blades, you got no blades, you got more arms, 6 arm, 7 arm, 8 arm, 10 arm. I mean, it's overwhelming the number of choices you have in Alabama rigs. But for me, I keep it pretty simple. So this is the one that I use 100% of the time. I believe it's a hog farmer, and I think it's called the BFL rig. And the reason that is this bait is legal in Major League Fishing, BFL, and Toyota Series events. So the way that the Alabama rig rule is you can have 5 wires, you can have 5 blades, and you can have 5 baits, but only 3 hooks. And that's exactly what this bait does here. So I want to use a bait that if the situation does arise that I'm fishing one of those tournaments, the Alabama rig that I use and have confidence in is legal in those tournaments. So that's why I use this guy right here. And you see that the top 2 arms are basically your decoy baits. So they actually just have a screw lock at the end of the wire that you can screw your decoy bait on. There's no swivel, no need for a hook or anything up there. It's just a screw lock. So that's just your decoy baits. And those have a couple of your blades on it. And having the blades on the top does a couple things. It helps keep this bait a little bit higher in the water column. You know, adding all these jig heads and stuff on here, that gets to be pretty heavy. And having those blades up top helps keep the bait up in the water column a little bit. So you got those 2, and then on your bottom ones, you got no blades on these 2, and then you got 1 blade on what would be the middle arm, and those are the 3 that are going to have your baits with the jig heads and the hooks on them that you're going to try to catch the fish on. You know, another cool way or another good feature about having the 3 jig heads at the bottom is it helps this bait ride correctly. You know, if you had a jig head up here and just cut the hook off, sometimes this bait would want to ride different, you know, because you have jig heads on all of these. If there's weight up here, sometimes this would be the bottom, and you know, your baits without hooks would be on the bottom where the fish would potentially bite it. So having, you know, just decoys with screw locks at the top guarantees that these 3 jig heads are always going to be at the bottom, and if that fish is coming up biting, he's going to eat one of these 3 back here. So that's why I choose this bait. For me, I like throwing it on fluorocarbon. So I got really heavy fluorocarbon on there. I got 25-pound Seagar Abrazex fluorocarbon. So it's super thick, super strong fluorocarbon that I know I can throw around any type of cover. If I get one of these hooks hung up in some wood or something, this line is strong enough that I can actually straighten this hook out and not lose the whole rig. So that's a super important thing there. I always like throwing fluorocarbon over braid just because it's clear, obviously, and I feel like it's a little bit stronger. And I don't like the noise of the line running through my guides. So pretty simple there. And then I just got a big heavy swim bait rod. Like this is a 7'9" heavy action. So it's a big heavy swim bait rod. But really you want just any rod with a long handle. You know, throwing an A-rig is pretty difficult because it's so heavy. You need that long handle to gain that leverage to throw that big bait and especially cast it very far. And then I like a big reel. So this is actually a 300 series Corrado on here. Big reel that holds a bunch of line, but it can handle that big heavy bait so you can cast it that far. All right, so that's pretty much the juice on the equipment. Now let's get down to the baits. Everyone likes talking about the baits. You know, it's hard to go wrong with just that right there. That's just a little Kitech swim bait. You know, those are excellent. They've caught so many bass over the years. But if there's one issue with those, it's that they like to tear up very easily. The plastic's pretty soft, they will rip. And you know, you get a couple bites on the A-rig and you're having to rig up a couple new swim baits, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 new swim baits at a time. So it gets pretty expensive. And this is something I've been messing around with lately. You know, this is a new bait that came out at iCast. Of course, we got them available in my exclusive Keller Becker's grape juice. This is actually some prototypes that I've been messing around with, but you've seen me throw that in the scope shed all year long, and it's been a fish catcher. But throwing these little swim baits, see, they're a little more durable. You know, these ones aren't gonna tear up as easily as those, but when you switch to this more thinner style swim bait, you do have to adjust the jig head you use. You see, on these swim baits here, I like a screw lock swim bait head. So this swim bait head actually has a screw lock in here that locks the swim bait on there. But when you get these thinner profile swim baits like this, that screw lock won't fit into the head of this bait. And if it does, it really just messes it up and it doesn't look right. So that's when you have to switch jig heads to more of your collared style jig head like that right there. That way, see that collar on there? It can slide into the head of this swim bait, and you're definitely gonna need your super glue on these to get him glued up and locked on there. But when you do that, I mean, this does a couple things. We're not gonna super glue it for this, but you see now that collar slid up in there and it didn't bulge the head of that plastic or anything. And now, you know, it allows that bait to swim perfectly. But you know, this type of swim bait does a couple things. It's a little bit more subtle action than this, so it's not gonna be as wide tail kick, you know, as much thump. It's gonna be a little more subtle. So this is excellent for that colder water especially. But I've really, you know, kind of started throwing this all the time. I really like this bait more all the time just because it's already putting off so much flash and vibration being the big Alabama rig. I like the little bit more subtle swim baits on there. And then adjusting your head size. So for me, I keep it pretty light on my jig head size. You know, this was a mistake that I made when I first started throwing these, was I was throwing way too heavy of a jig head. So for me, I like either a 3/16 or a 1/8 ounce jig head, probably 99% of the time. Because if you really think about it, we have 3 1/8 ounce jig heads on here. So if you add those up, that's 3/8 of an ounce combined between those three. Then you add the weight of the swim baits and the weight of the actual Alabama rig. It ends up being a pretty heavy bait that's gonna get down fairly deep. So, you know, if you add the 3/16, that's adding what, another 1, 2, 3/16 of an ounce to the total thing. So what would that be? If that's already 3/8, you add another, it's like 9/16. So, I mean, it adds a lot more weight to the overall profile, and that'll get down another 5, 10 foot, you know, if you're fishing over deep water. So throwing those heavier jig heads is an excellent little tip, but like I said, keeping it fairly light. If you put 1/4 or 3/8 ounce jig heads on there, that thing is gonna weigh a ton. It's gonna be really hard to cast, and it's gonna stay way deeper than you think trying to fish him. And what I've noticed is a lot of times you'll get down there and it will be getting hung up on the bottom because it's so heavy, it's dragging along the bottom and getting hung up. So that right there is an excellent way to set up your Alabama rig and get out there and catch some fish. Now, one other trick I'll leave you guys with, and this isn't, it's not necessarily a secret, but this is definitely something that you want to mess with if you're throwing the Alabama rig a lot, is mixing up your bodies. So you see, I actually have 2 different swim baits at the top than I have at the bottom. So my decoys look different than my bottoms. And that's something you can mess around with and try. You know, for me, honestly, I just had a couple of these swim baits laying around. I didn't want to waste them, so I put them on as my decoys. But the ones that you actually have the hooks in down here, what I would like to do is I would put all 4 of these actually with the same bait. So you have 2 decoys and then 2 with hooks as the exact same bait. And then your one in the middle, it kind of sticks out just a little bit further. This is generally the one that's going to get a bite. And on this guy, you know, I like to do something a little bit different. You either put a bigger profile bait, you put a different color, just something to stand out a little bit, and it gives those fish a target to come eat. Because like I said, generally speaking, he's going to eat that one in the middle that's just a little bit behind the rest of the group. And you know, if he's just a little bit different color, different size, something just to stick out a little bit, he's going to get that bite more often than not. So hopefully you guys learned something from these tips. Appreciate you guys watching. As always, leave those likes, comments down below. Don't forget, hit the subscribe if you haven't already. And we'll see you guys next time.